Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric.
Dark Souls 3 is intimidating. Very intimidating. Why make an intimidating game? In an interview with Weird, the game's director Miyazaki said he wanted to make a game that gives players accomplishment by overcoming tremendous odds. When viewed from this perspective, Dark Souls is tremendous odds. It is designed through and through to feel as difficult and brutal as it can. This is reflected in the writing as sadness, depression, and intimidation. But what makes Dark Souls intimidating? This alludes to a bigger question. How do we tell stories? I'm writing a game of my own, and I've been perplexed by this topic for a while. I decided to interview Professor Srauy at Oakland University about the subject, who provided a great deal of insight. First, he pointed out that writing in video games is not different than writing stories in other kinds of media. He pointed out that in all media, the only way to tell stories is to draw on what the audience already knows. This way, the writer can trust the audience to fill in the blanks. A familiar plot device used to tell a narrative is called a trope, and they're essential for writing. By drawing on what our audience already knows, we don't need to tell our stories explicitly, and we can instead focus on what's unique and interesting. How can we tell that this was employed in Dark Souls? Well, let's look at Winnie the Pooh and see how they arrived at the same solution when they were faced with the same problem. How do we make this look intimidating? Professor Srauy explained that Winnie the Pooh uses thorns and dead plants to make itself look intimidating. In Winnie the Pooh, they're drawing on the audience's understanding of thorns and death, because it's an experience that everyone has had. In Dark Souls, we don't see literal thorns, but we do see a lot of sharp, pointy objects. Even the title card looks sharp and worn. However, real life isn't the only thing that your audience knows. Look at the color in these two scenes. It's muted. Thorns are literally dangerous, but muted colors are culturally dangerous. For years, muted colors have been used by films and media that wants to look serious, sad, or in this case, dangerous. In fact, Dark Souls employs a great deal of cultural tropes that contribute to it having a strong atmosphere. The slow camera work, slow animation, desolate landscapes, dusty air, tattered clothing, and slow fades, these all contribute to Dark Souls feeling intimidating. But do we even need tropes? If everyone uses sharp, pointy things, won't they get cliché? In a romance, is it still a romance if no one kisses in it? Well, it might be, but is it still a romance if no one kisses, or holds hands, or looks at each other, or touches, or shares a single noodle of spaghetti? It might seem like you want to distance yourself from other romance stories by taking away the cliches, but if you do, you might distance your story so much that it's no longer recognizable as a romance. Or in drastic cases, it might not even look like a story. But what if you do have a bad trope? For example, there's a long legacy in films of damsels in distress. Wouldn't it be best not to use this trope? Well, it might be, eventually, but not at first. This is where you can choose to subvert a trope. Make a damsel and put them in distress. You can do it in different ways, but you can emphasize it by making your piece look like another work. Now, your audience is going to have some expectations about that character. She's probably weak, she probably needs help, and she's probably a she. But what if she's not? When I began talking about damsels in distress, you likely assumed I was talking about a girl. This is because you have an understanding of this trope and you made a judgment by filling in the missing pieces. But by being aware of your expectations and by showing you that you made a mistake, I made this trope look unimportant. I subverted it. But subversion isn't the only option when looking at tropes. You can also choose to reinforce a trope that you think is good. You might not even think that the trope is good, it might just fit for your story. For example, it would look pretty anticlimactic if the Avengers decided they had just had enough and they didn't want to save the world. Every superhero movie has to use the superhero trope, and each movie is going to need to decide if they want to reinforce that trope, like the Avengers, or if they want to subvert that trope, like in Deadpool. And they're going to have to make that decision based on what fits their story. So how do we tell stories? we use tropes. If you want to be a good writer, you have to have a good understanding of tropes, where they exist, and how to apply them. But first, have a good understanding of what tropes you're using and where they came from. Do have influences, it's important. Also, analyze your influences. Try to see what tropes they used, why they used them, and where they borrowed them from. Consider whether or not you want to reinforce or subvert those tropes. Tropes don't make up the entirety of the story, but they do make the foundation. Now, what about Mario games makes them feel so playful?